Hello, dear friends. I'm in a different room today. I'd like to talk about this week's parasha, which was Tisa. But what I'd like to talk about in general is specifically the Aron. Some ideas that I've been developing on the Aron, which is the Holy Ark of the Covenant in the tabernacle. Now, the Aron is mentioned multiple times. It was mentioned in Truma. It's mentioned also um, in this week's parsha and next week's parsha. It's mentioned a few times. There's some things I want to say about the Aron because it's sort of singled out. Number one, in all of the vessels of the sanctuary, it says in the singular vasita, you shall make him. This is told to Moses, and of course he tells Bezalel, who is the architect, but it's in the singular, except for the Aron, where it says ve'asu. It's in the plural. Now, there are two things in the plural in the sanctuary. One is the sanctuary itself. Ve'asuli migdash v'shachanti betocham. They shall make for me a temple, and I will dwell in their midst, in the midst of the people. And also the Aron. It says Vasu Aron. Now, the Aron, therefore, relates to all of the Jewish people. There's an interpretation of the Or Chaim. Says, what does it mean that the Aron is in plural? In what sense? Well, it means that it relates to all of the Jewish people. How does the Torah relate to all the Jewish people? Look at the mitzvot, the commandments. The commandments of the Torah could only be kept among all of the Jewish people, because out of the 613 commandments, there are those which are just for priests, for Kohanim. Some of them are only for Levites. Some of them only can be done in the land of Israel. Some of them can only be done in the temple, like the offerings, the daily offerings in the temple. And some of them are even contingent on circumstances. If somebody stole something, they have to give it back. It's a mitzvah to give it back. You're not going to tell somebody to steal in order to give back. That doesn't make any sense. So basically, the mitzvot are kept by the Jewish people, among all the Jewish people in all the generations, if you want to put it that way. Maimonides sort of calculated that on a daily basis, there are approximately 50 mitzvot that you could fulfill if you wanted to on a daily basis, some of them being obligatory and some of them being non-obligatory, like tzedakah, for instance, which is something every time you do it's a mitzvah, but it's not obligatory to do it at this moment or to that moment, etc. So that's the first idea I wanted to mention, this idea where the Aron stands out, which just like the tabernacle itself, the sanctuary, it says ve'asu in the plural. Another idea, which we find in the Midrash Rabbah, is that there are three kitarim, which means there are three crowns on top of three vessels, basically golden crowns. One is on the Aron. It's called the Zer Zahav, the golden crown on top of the Aron, which is a square. And the next one is on the shulchan, the showbread table. Also has a golden crown shaped like a square on the top of it. And the third one is Mizbach HaKetoret, which is the incense altar in the middle part of the temple. This, according to the Midrash, represents the three crowns of Judaism, which is called Keter Torah, the crown of the Torah, Keter Kehuna, the crown of the priesthood, which of course is the incense altar, and Keter Malchut, the crown of kingship, which relates, of course, to the showbread table, which represents wealth. These are the three crowns in the temple. But another thing I'd like to say is that there are some unusual things that have been said about specifically the Aron. So, as I said before, the Aron represents the Torah. But in what sense exactly, what is unique about the Aron? There are three very unusual statements by Chazal, by our sages, about the Aron specifically. One of them is that it says about the Aron that it did not take any place. It didn't take up any space in the sanctuary, in the Mishkan. This is mentioned in Baba Batra 99a. There is a tradition, either in the name of Shua ben Levi or the name of Rabbi Yochanan. The Talmud says it's one of the two, which is interesting. That does happen in the Talmud sometimes. And the tradition is Masoret Biadenu. We have a tradition that the Aron and the Keruvim, the cherubim, which is over the ark, Einan min Hamidah. They don't take up any space. And the Talmud calculates how this was derived, but what does that mean? They don't take up any space. They're there. So the Aron is there with the cherubims on top of it. Why doesn't it take up space? And why is that important to say? And how come the other ones take up space and the Aron doesn't? That's the first puzzling statement about the Aron. The second puzzling statement is what Chazal, our sages, say about what's called the badim, because the Aron was carried with these long sticks, which went through them, were actually made out of metal. So you have these, the sticks that are going through the Aron, which are called the badim, and this is the way the Levites carried the Aron. They carried the Ark of the Covenant by holding onto the badim. But the Talmud also makes a very unusual statement about that. It says that Habadim, Ha'aron nosed nosav, which means the Aron actually carried those who thought they were carrying the Ark of the Covenant. It was the Ark itself that was carrying them. Another puzzling statement. Why do you need this miracle? Why not have a couple of guys carrying it? It's not that heavy in the end. Okay, it might be made with gold, but it's not heavy. You have 8 guys, even 4 guys, they could probably carry it, but it seems to be the problem. And then you have a third very unusual statement. Remember, in the Aron, you had the tablets, meaning Moses' tablets, the second tablets that he brought down, and Shivrei Luchot, which were the broken tablets from the first time God gave the tablets to Moses, and of course he broke them when he saw the Israelites worshiping the golden calf. You have the tablets and the broken tablets. By the way, the Talmud says, why did you have the broken tablets? What's the point of having broken tablets? The Talmud says it's to teach you that a scholar who forgot his Torah has to be dealt with respect. So if you have an aging scholar and they have showing signs of memory loss, of Alzheimer or whatever, you still have to show them the respect. It's called the broken luchot in the Aron. But coming back to what I want to say about the luchot, the Midrash says something very strange about the luchot in our sages. It says, Mem v'samach b'neis hayu umdim, which means when the tablets were given to Moses, they were engraved, it says, and engraved is understood to mean that the letters were carved in from one side of the stone to the other side of the stone. Now that would make sense in most of the letters, because every letter, if like an aleph, it still can be connected to the stone. But there are 2 letters where it doesn't make sense. One of them is the final mem in Hebrew, which is written like a square, and the other one is the samach, which is written like a circle. So if you're going to carve in a circle, that means it should fall out of the stone. If you're going to carve in a square and go around it, it should fall out of the stone. It's like a square, like a square which is with nothing inside of it, of course. Same thing with the circle of the samach. So why didn't it fall out? So our sages say that it was held up miraculously. What exactly is going on here? The Maharal of Prague, when he talks about the first statement that I said, the Aron takes no place, he says because the Aron is connected to the higher worlds. And just as the higher spiritual worlds have no place, the Aron has no place. Okay, this is an interesting idea. But how exactly is this supposed to work? And what does it mean today? How can we understand this concept today? In my humble opinion, in order to understand this concept today, we have to try to understand in the modern period the changes that have happened in our understanding of time and space and try to connect it to this idea. Let me go back for a moment. I'm going to turn the clock back, pardon the pun, to Descartes. Descartes already, in his five meditations, had this idea in his five meditations. He questioned our validity of the validity of trusting our five senses. Because after all, Descartes says, there's no way that we can leave our head to know if what we see is what we see and what we hear is what we hear. And okay, you can say, but we all see the same thing. Yes, but for me to know that you see the same thing as me, I have to hear you saying it, right? So it's the same thing. How do I know even you're there if I have to trust my ears or my sense of touch or my eyes to know that you are talking to me and you actually exist? So it might be just like something playing in my hard drive to make me feel that there are all these things. So how do I know all these things? Now, Descartes, because after all, the example he would bring would be if I drink a little bit of alcohol, or let's say a lot of alcohol, I might see two policemen coming to take me out of the bar and not one, because I'm going to start seeing strange, which means that we can tamper with our sight, we can tamper with our hearing. So if we can tamper with it, maybe it works on a certain hard drive, which of course Descartes wouldn't have used that term, and maybe we can tamper with it, so maybe it's not objective. That's why at the end of his discussion in the five meditations, he makes his famous statement that the only thing that we really know are the things which are in our head. So since our thinking process is in our head, the only way we can actually know that we exist is because since we cogito ergo sum, since we think, I think, therefore I am. Because the only thing that actually I know for sure that exists is my thoughts, which are within my head, and therefore don't have to rely on my five senses. So basically, Descartes just asked the question, but he didn't really have an answer to this question. You have to fast forward to the 18th century, the end of the 18th century, to the writings of Immanuel Kant. Kant asked the question, what exactly is time and space? So he basically continues the same questions of Descartes. And he says, if there's really no way for me to prove that what I see out there is correct, how do I know it's true? And besides, it's very possible that both time and space are modes of thinking of my mind, which means they are the capacities of the way my mind interprets reality. I see reality spatially. I think of reality temporally, but this is the way my mind works in my hard drive, not necessarily out there. Whatever is happening out there is happening out there. The way I interpret it through my brain is through time and space, and that way I'm able to function. And so Kant basically, again, he can't prove that because he cannot leave his head in order to look at the world. But he assumes that it's very possible that the noumen of the world, meaning the essence of the world, might be very different from the way our brain interprets it through mind and space, through time and space. And so the phenomena, the way we understand it, could be very different than its essence, which is the noumenon. This was the ideas already projected by Immanuel Kant in the late 18th century. For those who are familiar with the Hasidic and Kabbalist writers, you might find an interesting parallel, and I wrote about this, with Sefer HaTanya, Shara Yichud Ve'emunah, the way he talks about reality, Rav Shneur Zalman Eladi, or in Nefesh HaChaim of Chaim Volozhin, the way he talks about reality in the late 18th century too, which is an interesting comparison, especially since the Baal HaTanya probably did not know about the existence of Kant. However, Chaim Volozhin might have, because there was a book that came out in Vilna during the lifetime of Chaim Volozhin, which is called Sefer Habrit, a book that was written by Rabbi Pinchas Eliyahu Horovitz, and it was published in Vilna. And the book Sefer Habrit is a very interesting book. It is a book about the natural world, which was written for Torah scholars. In other words, the idea that Torah scholars should have at least a basic understanding of the natural world, and it's written in Ivrit, of course. And in that book, he happens to mention some things about Immanuel Kant too. So it is possible Chaim Volozhin knew about Kant through that book. Rav Shneur Zamiladi, it's just not clear. But the point is, they're interesting parallels, which I'm not going to talk about now. But my point is, already in philosophy, there were questions about whether our concepts of time and space might be concepts of the way our brain processes the information of what we get from the outside, and not necessarily what is outside. We know that our brain plays tricks on us. The image that comes to your eye is upside down. The brain has to, of course, flip it the other way. We can see from a distance the road. When we see the road and we know it has parallel lines, but when we look at the road from a distance, it looks like the road is getting thinner. Or we're driving in the car. But our brain explains to us that no, that's just the tricks of your eye, but it's actually parallel lines. And in Gestalt psychology, this is talked about a lot, the tricks that the brain does in order to correct faults in what we see in reality. And sometimes the brain overcompensates and creates the faults itself. So we remain with the question of whether our understanding of time and space is the same. If I move for a moment to the area of physics, in the Newtonian world of physics, of course, the world worked like the laws of physics were like clockwork. Everything was universal. Time was universal. Your watch was like my watch, and space was space, and time was time. But they all worked in unison because speed can be distance over time, and that's the equation, and everything could be measured. However, in the 20th century, with the theory of relativity of Einstein, it was discovered that space and time are, number one, the same, and secondly, affect each other. Now, these are things that go beyond my expertise, but I want to just say a couple of things that I learned um, from various places. And I think one of the most interesting things that you can see is some of the lovely videos of Professor Richard Feynman of the late Professor Richard Feynman, really, really interesting videos that he made for the intellectual layman about issues in modern physics. I just want to say one simple thing here. According to the theory of relativity, Newtonian physics is correct as long as you're on planet Earth and you are moving the way we move, because we move like snails, not just human beings. Our cars, our horses, our camels, even our planes are moving like snails. At most they can do is break the sound barrier. They don't even get close to the speed of light. Now, in theory, the faster you go, it can create a space warp. So, theoretically, if a person is traveling close to the speed of light, it would actually change. It would also create a time warp, which means if I was in a space capsule, that was going very close to the speed of light, I might feel that I was going for 30 days to Mars and back. However, when I would come back to planet Earth, people who were 20 years old might all of a sudden be 70 years old, because for them, time went faster than it went for me. And according to this theory, which can be proved mathematically, if you're actually traveling at the speed of light, time stops and space completely folds itself up. So you have, now the reason I'm mentioning it is that even in physics, even though physics accepts that there is these units of space and time in the world, but they seem to be relative to such a extent that they can be changed, they can warp. And then the question is, if we take from this philosophical point of view, that the world might look different than when we see it. And I have to mention another thing too. According to both these views, it's not that space and time, it's not that the world doesn't exist. According in philosophy, for instance, the world exists, but the noumenon, according to Kant, is probably very different than the way I perceive it. Meaning the world itself is probably very different from the way I perceive it, but does exist. In the same vein, you could say of physics too, and I heard Feynman say that you can talk about the world being sort of like a hologram, but it's not a hologram in the sense that it's fake. It's only in the sense that it is planned in a special way for us to see it in this particular way, only in that sense. So I guess there is a certain subterranean common understanding about this. Because it continues, I just want to add one thing that I didn't say before, and I think it's important. When we talk about time, there's another thing that we have to take into even our own understanding of time. For instance, we can see in our own lives that time might be conditional. It can actually be changed. In what sense? First of all, one of them is, a child. For a child, a day seems to be a long time. But the older you get, the faster time keeps moving. The question is this psychological or is it real? Meaning, does our brain adjust time? And does it make time become faster for us in the way we perceive time? So according to Kant, if time is in the hard drive of our brain, maybe the brain is speeding up time as we're going on in life. Because in research that was done among people who were aging, everybody agreed that the sensation of time going faster is real. You really feel that time is going faster. Now, some people explain it in such a way. When I'm a child and I'm 5 years old, so 1 year is 25% of my life. So, whoa, that's a long time. So it feels like a long time. That's possible. However, that's just mathematical. I need a psychological explanation. Psychological explanation might be something like this. For a child, everything is new. Even for young people, life keeps changing. You go from grade school to high school to college. You get your first job, your first boyfriend or girlfriend. You meet new people. You get opportunities and possibilities, etc. So life is very full. Like it says in the Torah, "Et mispar yamecha amalei," I shall fill your days. Life is very full and with new and exciting things. So the more you fill your days, the longer they seem to you psychologically. By the way, that could be a good way for a person, the aging person too. You see, we look at life and it's like Kohelet says, there's nothing new under the sun. But the more that we fill our days with things that give us interest and meaning, the more we're going to remember those days and the more we'll feel like we're living. So it's just, I'm saying that there might be ways actually to counter this feeling of time speeding up by filling up your days with things which are your interests and also things which you feel are meaningful in your lives. That's one thing I want to mention. Another one, again from the psychology, but it seems to be more than that. You go to sleep at night. When you go to sleep, you wake up in the morning. Now, if you had a good night's sleep, that 7 or 8 hours feels like half an hour, something like that. You don't feel like you slept that long. If you feel that you slept that long, you probably didn't sleep well. But when you slept well, yeah, you had dreams, whatever. So it's almost like your brain turned off your sense of time for a while because you didn't need it. You were sleeping. Do you see what I'm saying? So it is possible that your brain is controlling your sense of time, which again might be a proof to the fact that time is something which your brain is using. Now I want to get back to the main part of what we started with, and that is, why is it that the Talmud and the Midrash bring these three unusual statements specifically about the Aron out of all the vessels of the sanctuary? Number one, that the Aron takes no space. Number two, that the badim, that the rods that were used to carry the Aron, they were actually carrying the Levites and not vice versa. That the tablets that Moses got, the Mem and Samach were there by miracle, standing in midair because there was nothing attached to them. Why? Three different things related specifically to the Aron and its contents. I want to explain it this way. The Aron, which represents the Torah, is the actual connection between heaven and earth from a Jewish point of view. It is the revelation of Sinai in every generation. Because at the revelation of Sinai, it says, Kol Gadol Velo Yasaf, which is interpreted as, it was a mighty voice which never stops. There's also a midrash in Pirkei Avot, the Mishnah, which says, B'chol yom bat kol yotzeit mihar Chorev. Every day there is a heavenly voice that comes from Mount Chorev. Mount Chorev, of course, is one of the appellations for Sinai. And because if there can be the voice of the Torah, there can be a heavenly voice. And what does the heavenly voice say? Oy le'elahem labriot me'el bona shel Torah. It is so terrible for people that, meaning the Jewish people, who leave the Torah in its corner and don't try to study it. Because the Torah is this constant voice of God penetrating the generations, and that's represented by the Aron. So the Aron, in a sense, is this connection between the lower world and the higher world. And since it represents the higher world is not within the parameters or even with the coordinates of the physical world. So what does it mean the Aron doesn't take space? Because it's coming from a dimension where there is no space or time. How this actually would work, it's interesting to imagine it, but they're trying to say it comes from a coordinate where there's no space or time, so it possibly could be that way too. What does it mean that the Levites think that they're carrying the Aron, but they're not? Because when the Levites are holding on to those, to the poles, which are carrying the Aron, all of a sudden they don't feel gravity anymore because they're not experiencing time and space. So even if they're moving forward, it doesn't feel like anything is happening. And the third one, as Moses is receiving those first tablets from God, he's directly connected to the upper world. In fact, the Midrash says Moses held on to the bottom two handbreadths of the tablets, because they were 6 handbreadths tall, as if God was holding on to the top 2 handbreadths, and in the middle there were 2 handbreadths too. So as he's holding on, he's still connected to this upper world. So all of the tablets that he's receiving are miraculous. The fact that the Mem and Samach are singled out is because those are the ones where it's most noticeable because they're hanging in the midair. But it's the tablets completely which are still connected to the world, which is above time and space. So I think that this is an idea which is being related here. And I want to end off with one other point about this idea of space and the Torah. And that is, from all our Hebrew calendar, there is only one holiday from the Bible which has no date in the Torah, and that is the holiday of Shavuot, of Jewish Pentecost, which we call Zman Matan Toratenu, the holiday of the giving of our Torah. Why is that? This is explained by the Bnei Yisachar, Rabbi Tzvi Elimelech of Dinov, that the Torah can't have a date because its source is from beyond this universe. It cannot exist within time in the same way. So therefore, the only way to get to Shavuot is by counting ourselves and getting to that day, because the Torah itself doesn't relate to a specific date in the calendar, which is a temporal concept. So these are some ideas I wanted to give across, and I hope you find meaning in it. Shalom, shalom.